So we'll get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer Lee. I am Korean American and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an advisor for the English department. Alongside with me is my partner.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Wright, and I identify as a Filipino American. I use the pronoun hers, and I am an advisor over at the Jim Moran College of Entrepreneurship, but we are here under the Advising First Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. And so we are very appreciative of you all coming on time. And we are looking forward to all your questions. And we're all about the conversations that we will be having.
Yes, definitely. Both Nikki and I really hard on this, and we're again very thankful for you all coming, along with our esteemed panelists who will have their own introductions coming up soon. So before we dive into the terminology, the questions and introductions, we did want to provide a disclosure, just three main ideas that are notes that we really wanted to touch on before we start this conversation. First, we want to mention that Asian Pacific American or APA identity is a spectrum. Everyone is at different points in their lives, and understanding the ins and outs of this specific identity can be really confusing and different for each and every one of us here. So we want to recognize that the thoughts and opinions that are going to be shared today is just a fraction of understanding of the APA community as a whole. But we also want to recognize to not discount for our panelists' lived experiences. The second thing we want to note is that Pacific Islanders are also pan-ethnic. They have their own sets of values, traditions, and social issues that we unfortunately won't be able to touch on today, given that the demographics for the FSU student population just isn't presented there. So this presentation will mainly focus on Asian Americans. And then finally, this is going to be an open dialogue. So we want to make sure that everyone understands that the purpose of today's panel is to shed light on the experiences within the APA community. We're going to have deep conversations on identity, stereotypes, current events, and we also want to share with you all ways that the non-APA community can show support to the APA community and what that looks like moving forward.
And so we wanted to touch on terminology that is important to know, and just know that there are many terms and many phrases that you might be well aware, but we just wanted to bring light to some of the ones that we may discuss today. And so we obviously want to identify what Asian Pacific American is, and it's a term adopted by activists in the late 20th century to depict Americans of East Asian, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and Pacific Islander ancestry. Another term that we may be familiar with is the model minority. And so it's a myth creating a racial wedge that minimizes the role racism plays, a label perpetuating the narrative that Asian Americans are law-abiding citizens who are successful, academic, cultural, and economic domains. It is the debilitating expectation placed upon Asian Americans to be smart, submissive, wealthy, self-reliant, hardworking, and others. We also wanted to bring light on the word microaggressions, the everyday slights and insults that minoritized people endure and dominant people don't notice or concern themselves with. Another term we also want to bring a light that we will also touch in this presentation is the bamboo ceiling. So this refers to the processes and barriers that serve to exclude Asians and Asian Americans from executive positions on the basis of subjective factors such as lack of leadership potential and lack of communication skills that cannot actually be explained by job performance or qualifications. And the last two terms that we will touch and may talk about during this presentation would be the perpetual foreigner and yellow fever. So the perpetual foreigner cast Asian Americans as fundamentally foreign individuals who will never fully assimilate into American society. For example, even second and third generation Asian Americans are frequently asked where they are from or told what they speak English surprisingly well. And last but not least, we have the yellow fever. So a sexual fetish rooted in racialized and gender stereotypes for Asian and Asian American women. So again, some of these terms may be touched during this presentation. However, we just want to keep in mind that these are, again, important terminology to be familiar with within this population.
Now we're going to move on to introducing our panelists. And so I guess we could just go down the rows. So we can start off with Sneha.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Sneha. I use she, her pronouns and identify as Indian American. I am going to be a fourth-year undergraduate student, and I was the education coordinator for the Asian American Student Union this past year, and I will be the incoming director for the next year for ASU.
All right, we have Ravi.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, everyone. So my name is Ravi Bhatt. I also identify as Indian American. I am the current grad assistant for student conduct community standards, and I am an upcoming second year in our higher education master's program. And I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you. Zach.
Afternoon, I'm Zach Heng. I graduated in 2007 with the degree in information technology. I currently reside in the Washington, D.C. metro area and work for Booz Allen Hamilton, a management consulting firm. And so I serve in a lot of different roles. One listed here is National Board of Directors for the FSU Alumni Association. I guess it's worthwhile to share that ethnically, I'm Korean and Chinese. And I was a former director of the Asian Student Union, currently a global co-chair for the Multicultural Business Resource Group for Booz Allen Hamilton, and just actively involved in the community overall. I serve as president for a nonprofit organization in the DC Metro focused on Pan-Asian advancement and development, specifically in corporate America. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Dr. Campos.
Hi, my name is Portia Campos, and I'm an assistant teaching professor at the Askew School of Public Administration and Policy. And some of my research interests center around social capital and Filipino American communities, future studies, and also civic engagement and social justice. Outside of, I guess, academia, I'm very involved in the community. I have been a very active member of the Big Bend Filipino American Association, and I'm also a member of the Asian Coalition of Tallahassee. And I identify as being Filipino American, and I'm also born and raised here in the US.
Thank you. And then finally, Aurora.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Aurora Hansen. I'm from the Philippines. I was naturalized in 1987. I have a degree in science journalism, mass communications, and dance. And I'm also a certified public manager. And I am active in community groups and civic engagement with these groups. I am now the Director of Education and Advocacy for the Asian Coalition of Tallahassee. I just stepped down as the director, and also involved with the Big Bend Filipino American Association and other groups in the community.
Thank you all. So before we actually dive into these moderating questions, we just want to make note to the audience that you are welcome to send in your questions through the Zoom chat. I believe we have it set to only allowing questions be sent directly to the hosts, both Nikki and I. And so Nikki will be in charge of filtering those questions. And then towards the end, when we have time, we can get around to answering some of those. So feel free to send in your questions as we progress through the presentation. All right. So the very first question is on APA identity. So the term Asian American was created in the late 60s, aimed to increase the visibility of activists of Asian descent. And it encompasses a rapidly growing demographic that includes a vast array of ethnic groups and diverse histories and experiences. So how do you all self-identify? You guys already sort of mentioned that in your introductions, but also what does it mean for you to be Asian American? Anyone who likes to talk first can do so.
Sure, I guess I can go ahead and start. And I just remember growing up, because I am American, because I was born in the South, in Charleston, South Carolina, and I grew up in Jacksonville. And my father has immigrated from the Philippines because as a Navyman. So he is retired 20 years from the US Navy. And so growing up, it was always difficult, because the thing about being Asian is that you're identifiable. And it's the perpetual question of, you know, what you guys outlined, the perpetual foreigner. Where are you from? No, where are you really from? And so growing up, that was always a little bit difficult for me, because I always identified as being American or Filipino American. And the difficulty was that, you know, people at school or kids at school would just wonder where I'm from. But then also relatives and family members would always see me as being American. And so back then I used to think I was trapped between cultures. But as I gotten older, I've really learned to appreciate who I am and where I come from. And I'll never, ever deny that, you know, because that's who you see and that's who I am. And I no longer say that I'm trapped between cultures, that actually I have a love of two different cultures. And it's what makes me who I am today, that I love being American and my American culture and values, and especially having the ability to be civically engaged and to exercise my democratic freedoms. At the same time, I was raised in a very strict Filipino household, and I love my culture and who I am and where I come from. And so, you know, learning that side of me is never ending. And it gives me my love of who I am, where I come from, and I'm never afraid to share that information with anyone who's interested in learning and understanding.
Thank you.
I think as you were speaking, Dr. Campos, I was thinking a little bit about my own experience of, you know, I was born in India and I was raised in America, but all of my father's family and one of my mom's sisters are in India. So every summer we would go to India and like visit them. And I always felt like I was never Indian enough for them because I was like raised in America. And I learned Gujarati, which is like the language that they speak and that I speak at home. But it always like, they always distinguish my Gujarati as different than like the Gujarati that they would speak, even though it's the same language. So I always felt like at odds with myself in terms of my culture. And, you know, I've always taken a lot of passion in learning about my culture and being part of my culture, even while being raised in America. And my parents have always been Gujarati through and through and instilled in me a lot of respect and grown and I've grown in this Gujarati culture while also living in America and learning a lot about American culture. And so I think, you know, to this day, there's still that challenge of like going to India and knowing that like maybe my Gujarati sounds a little broken to people who have spoken Gujarati their entire lives, right? And that's okay, because my Gujarati is my Gujarati, and I love my Gujarati and I love their Gujarati, and I'm excited to be part of this culture that is who I am. And so I know I rambled a little bit there, but I just think that me and being an Asian American is loving who I am and the culture that is part of who I am.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in too. You know, I was born here as well. My father immigrated here when he was about 18 from Malaysia. And my mom was adopted at the age of 3, a Korean American adoptee, which is quite common. And so growing up, is very much an American household. My dad's actually a retired Navy as well. And so it was very much like, red, white, and blue all the time. And for a long time, for a lot of my childhood, as a matter of fact, I was actually bullied quite a lot. I grew up in the Northern Virginia area. Spent some time in Florida during high school, which led me to Florida State. But it was one of those things where I wasn't American enough for some of my American friends, but I wasn't also Asian enough for a lot of my Asian friends. So I was similar to Portia. I was stuck between two worlds, right? And through my time at Florida State, actually, is when I really started to learn and discover and kind of embrace my identity, embrace who I am, kind of dispelling a lot of the negativity surrounding my childhood, but really owning what it means to be an Asian and an American in today's world. So I use a lot of those experiences within my own career, my business leadership, my community leadership, and all things like that. So in bringing those different perspectives and varying kind of experiences to everything that I do in my full self, whether it be my role with the Alumni Association or with my my career, it's important that people understand that not only is it a kind of American cultural kind of way of life, but how are we kind of reconciling those identities together and promoting that inclusion, because Asians are not a monolith in multifaceted, multi-ethnic, multi-continental in a lot of ways, right? So how are we opening the conversation and a dialogue in a meaningful manner so that people can be comfortable in embracing who they are and bringing their whole selves to everything they do as well. But it was a journey, in short, a journey from my childhood to where I am today.
Thank you for sharing, Zach. Do our other panelists want to touch on this question before we move on?
Yeah, I was just gonna say really quick, I definitely resonate with a lot of the things that a lot of the other panelists have talked about. Something just to add, I think with the question of how do you self-identify? For the longest time, especially growing up, I feel like I didn't even really self-identify as Asian American. I always thought of myself as just Indian or Indian American. And a lot of times if I said I was Asian, people would be like, no, you're not Asian. You don't have the right facial features for that, or you don't look Asian, India is not part of Asia, stuff like that. And so I checked the box on the form, but it was kind of this struggle of what do I identify as and where do I fit in? And I think it's really telling that the term, as Jennifer was saying, the term Asian American was coined by college student activists who were trying to bring together different cultural identities of Asians, as Zach was talking about all the different ethnicities and groups and diversity within Asian culture, and bringing everyone together to form solidarity and advance rights for Asian Americans and kind of bring to light issues that were going on within the community. And I think coming to college and finding Asian American Student Union and different being able to talk to different groups of people and people from different backgrounds and stuff, I think I've been able to find my identity as an Asian American person and understand the shared issues that we face, while also still recognizing the importance of highlighting the diversity of the community and the differences between our experiences as well. So I think it's definitely a really big balance between those two aspects of being Asian American.
Thank you, Sneha. I think we're going to move on to the next question. Nikki?
Yes. And so in thinking about the Asian American stereotype, I know that we may have gone through this where it's it has been deemed that we are smart in the areas of STEM. So we know math pretty well. We're pretty fast on technology. We are again, this model minority myth. And so the question that we have is, for Asian American stereotypes, especially the model minority myth, can be damaging to the APA identity and can have negative effects in different aspects of life. How do you counter these, though others say positive, negative stereotypes?
Can I answer that in my own personal experience? Because I am the oldest one in this bunch.
Yes.
When I first came to the United States as an exchange student, that was in 1968. I was the very first one in the community. I came from Manila with 9 million people to an exchange program that put me in a state and part of the in the community of 600 people. I was the first non-white person in that. So they had a lot of their stereotypes were, and I think I told Nikki about this one time. We had they were looking at the books in the library and they asked me, why why do you have Western clothes? And then, why are houses like our houses? So I went to the library and looked at the copyright, the date of publishing for the book. In 1968, that book was published in 1948. So they had really, really, really old ideas of what Asians are, or Filipinos, because I was the first Filipino in that community. And my American family was so overprotective of me, because people would come up to me and touch my skin and they go, wow, or touch my hair. And sometimes when it got to me, I would say, oh, be careful, that skin color might get on you, or my hair, I mean, just stop that kind of thinking of people. But they had very, very, oh, what am I saying? They had very concrete ideas of what Asians were, or any foreign student. At Iowa State, when I went, I took a class in speech therapy, a speech class, and the instructor said, I have to say this, that all foreigners have a speech impediment. That didn't sit well with me. And I raised my hand and I said, sir, excuse me, I think you have a brain impediment. That is the most racist thing I've ever heard anybody say about a foreign student. And like I told everybody, there were 1,000 kids in that class, because we had huge classes at Iowa State. I was the only one that got an A that time, because I worked really hard to tell that guy I can handle the class like everybody else. And I do not have a speech impediment because I speak English well. So those were just the Asian stereotypes that they had, that we couldn't speak well, our clothes should not be like Western clothes, or, why do we eat these things? Or the big thing is Asian stereotype, oh, do you eat dog? I'm like, yeah, I've eaten them. It's really lean. It's not a staple in my family, but I've tasted it. So those things, or you should be very smart in math. I said, math is not my favorite subject. I'm probably one of those Asians that math is not the all encompassing thing. But I'm smart in a lot of other things. I'm average in math, so those those things still resonate, and sometimes will hurt my heart when I think about it. So that's all I want to share.
Well, thank you for sharing, Tita Aurora. Does anyone else want to take a stab at this question?
Well, actually, I had experience when I was about, I think 12 years old. And I think there was an event that was going to be held at our school, and they needed someone to play the piano. And so I had my teacher asked me, oh, because she didn't see me raise my hand to do this. And then she just kind of points at me, like pretty much in the middle of class, and saying, Portia, you don't play the piano? Don't you play the piano? And I'm like, no. And I found that a very, very odd to point me out and say that. And I'm like, no. And she said, but all little Filipino girls play the piano. And I was so embarrassed, but at the same time angry, because I did not grow up wealthy, absolutely not. I come from a one-income household. My father was very poor and it was a farmer in the Philippines and could not even afford a toothbrush or shoes. And so he used to write a letter to the US government every single week asking to be enlisted in the military, because he realized that from his situation, he's already at the bottom, and he had nothing else to look forward to in his life because he was that poor. And eventually he came to the US. He was accepted in the US military. But even growing up here, we were lucky to have food and clothes on the table. And growing up, people just assuming that I was wealthy or rich, when that was the opposite. And even in grade school and high school, I was on free lunch. And so that model myth, that model minority myth is, it really sickens me, because you can't make that assumption really about anybody, and especially about Asians, because that it signals that you're only looking at the outside and you're not looking behind what this idea or facade. That I think with any individual beyond being our ethnicity, beyond the ethnicity, that you can't make assumptions about people. And so the way that I kind of combat this is really telling that story, the story that I've just shared with you. And I shared that with my students in class, that if my father can make it, and if he gave me that opportunity, and I took that opportunity, and by the way, I'm not the smartest person in my class. I certainly did not graduate valedictorian, but I did work hard to get where I'm at today. And if I'm able to work hard, then any other person, regardless beyond ethnicity, can do the same thing. But we cannot limit individuals to thinking that those are our only talents, the stereotypes that have been created.
Thank you so much, Portia. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add real quickly too. In addition to speaking up, right? As others mentioned, like speaking up really does help to counter these negative stereotypes. But more than that, data doesn't lie. As a lot of stereotypes go, Asians are seen as highly successful, but the disparity across different ethnic groups is just staggering, right? Income level, for example, the highest earning ethnic groups, according to statistics, are Indian, Filipino, and Japanese. On the lower end is Nepalese, Burmese, and Hmong, right? So, and there's about a 50K disparity between the two, between the top end and the bottom end. And to think that all Asians can become successful is just a stereotype in and of itself. We have, across the different ethnic groups, different challenges, different regional challenges, different cultural challenges, so on and so forth. And one of those cultural challenges being an inherently seen as meek or passive or introverted. And to that end, Asians are statistically higher likely to get hired in a company compared to other minority groups, but staggeringly a least likely minority to get promoted into management and leadership roles. So when we think about the perception of Asians and Asian Americans, it's often the doer, not the leader. And so presenting all this data is a way for people to become educated on what it is that really sets Asian challenges apart from other minority groups. And something that I'm highly involved with as part of my nonprofit work with an organization called Ascend, is really combating those stereotypes and thinking that, in kind of combating specifically that that executive and leadership disparity of Asians being just the doers and the worker bees, and not really someone seen as leaders. So putting Asians in position for advancement into the C-suite and beyond is really the core of that mission. But aside from that little plug about the nonprofit work, is really just data, right? Data doesn't lie. And if you look at the data that's all out there, Asians and Asian Americans have distinctly different challenges as a culture, as an upbringing, just as a, as a multi-ethnic and multi kind of faceted group, that you just can't make a blanket statement about any sort of a blanket stereotype about Asians as a whole. So speaking up and providing a sensible amount of data is really how you start to combat all these negative stereotypes.
Thank you, Zach. I think your response is a great segue to our next question, which is, so we touched on how Asian stereotypes can be damaging and how sometimes that these influences can affect our decision-making, our choices. So how did your APA identity influence your choice for your major and or career? And what advice would you give an APA student who is aspiring to pursue careers outside of fields that are often encouraged by the APA community?
So I can start with this one. So my life goal is to continue working in student affairs as of right now. And in student affairs, for my undergrad, one thing that I notice is that there is not a lot of representation of people that look like me or that like speak the same language as me. And I really kind of started thinking about how important that representation is. And I remember taking my first like student undergrad position as a desk staffer in a res hall, and my supervisor, who is a white man, saw some potential in me in moving up in different roles within residential life. And that was the first time that I was kind of told, like, hey, you should think about moving up, right? And like obviously I was a freshman in college and I really wasn't, like, my brain wasn't really thinking about like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do for my life more outside of like my major. But I remember thinking like, wow, there was no one that looks like me that has ever told me that I should consider moving up. And what would the impact have been if my supervisor at the time was a brown man or was an Indian man who believed in me and encouraged me to go into this field where people usually who are Indian or Asian American don't enter that field as often? What impact would that have been? And how many folks am I going to impact as an Asian student or as an Asian student affairs practitioner in their interest of this field as well? And so I think, being a part of that representation is really important to me, and encouraging and, kind of pushing that representation in all different aspects. I know there's questions later on about like what action steps can come after this, but kind of encouraging and being part of that representation is really important to me. And like that impacted my choice to go into student affairs, because not only will I be able to then kind of be more of a piece of that representation, but then also bring a lot of that table to students who may not have a seat at that table.
Thank you, Ravi. Definitely resonated with your response there. Anyone else?
Can I just add something, please? My experiences were, there were some nice ones, some not so nice. But when I was a freshman at Iowa State University, I was asked to be in the organization called the Cyclone Aids, which helped international students and new students when they came into campus. And the international population was very small. And I worked with the international students, and I was really surprised when they asked me so that to be a helper in when bringing these students in and help them with housing and other aspects of college life. So that is what has given me the experience that I carry on all the time now too. So, that's one of the things that helped me understand both sides of the story, how to help faculty talk to students, and how to help the students talk to faculty. So that's all I needed to share.
You're
Oh yeah, I'll jump in. So, you know, my parents are very much very conservative in a lot of ways, and really subscribing to a lot of the traditional values of the Asian cultures. Despite my mom being Korean and adopted, she was, you know, innately Asian. Some of the very, you know, tiger mom-esque type of behaviors, as some may know, but I think my identity, where it really came into play, was, you know, in pursuing my different majors. You know, having discussions with my parents about, you know, what major should I pursue, and the bottom line, the main message was always do something practical, right, and do something that can provide some stability. So I read into that. What I took away from that was do something safe. And that's not always the best path for people, right? And so if you're, you know, some people, a lot of my friends, a lot of folks that I meet, they studied accounting, they studied finance, they studied, you know, pre-med, all the sort of STEM related fields, because that's what their parents told them to do. And I was no different. My parents were like, do something that's going to set you up for a good career, and don't take many risks. And that is kind of plays into the whole stereotype of just working hard and building a good life for yourself and building a lifestyle, you know, doing the whole family thing. But, you know, I'm starting to embark on different career paths, and there's a whole philosophy on parallel career paths, as many are starting to discover now. But, you know, the thing that I'm starting to realize is the things that I was good at in school is not always the stuff that you're passionate about. And so for me, my degrees in IT, my whole career has been grounded in technology and business, but it's always been something I was good at. And I'm just going to be very transparent with all of you. It's not something I'm passionate about. It's just something that provides me a good lifestyle. But, you know, to that end, it's important for folks to kind of be very reflective, be very introspective, and in pursuing a passion, pursuing something that makes them happy. And I know that's a very American mindset to have, but happiness, fulfillment, and a passion really produces a greater lifestyle, greater sense of lifestyle. You don't wake up dreading to go to work every day. And if you wake up looking forward to the weekend, you're in the wrong career. And so I say that because through all the different learnings that I've had over the years, and all the different, you know, stuff that I've studied, I don't have kids yet, but I've already kind of thought about how I want to raise my kids. And if my kid wakes up one day and says, I want to be, you know, a sketch artist, I might be taken aback a little bit. I'm not going to lie, but my message to them will be, if you're going to do that, be the best damn artist you can be, right? And make sure you're doing it because you love it. And so, like, for me, I was so much influenced by my parents, like so many of you. But, you know, the thing that the bottom line advice I would give to any student that wants to pursue non-traditional careers is make sure you can own it, make sure you can stand on it, and be prepared to pursue it with conviction. Otherwise, that fear and that kind of the almost negativity and maybe doubt surrounding you by friends, family, others will always eat at you. So, but if you know in your heart that's what you want to do, pursue with conviction and passion, and you'll be successful. I can promise you that. So that's my hot take on it.
Thank you, Zach. Is there anyone else before we proceed to the next question? Okay.
Right. So Zach touched on this in the previous slide about oftentimes the an APA employee may be seen as the doer and not the leader. And again, in bringing back to what the bamboo ceiling is about, we are very familiar with the term, the glass ceiling, ensuring that women have a place to break through and reach potential like leadership positions. It is similar in the regards of the bamboo ceiling, where there are plenty of Asian employees out there that are also trying to promote themselves. I know that oftentimes the characteristics is, most Asians pull themselves up by the bootstraps. The more effort they put in, the more that they can be seen. But we just wanted to know your experiences in your leadership roles. How did you navigate your workplace as an APA? And how can we best support non-APA and APA colleagues best support each other in pursuing those leadership roles?
Well, I can tell you the one thing that really inspired me in my position is, and I am a graduate, by the way. I did receive my master's in public administration from the ASCII school. And one of the things that I learned as a student is that the very first graduate of the ASCII school in the doctoral program happens to be Filipino American. And his name is Raul De Guzman. Raul De Guzman is also known as the father of public administration in the Philippines. And he had graduated in, I think it was around 1956, 1957. And during that time period, he was an exchange student. And so knowing that this is our first graduate and we have an award for the best doctoral paper under the name of the De Guzman Award, knowing that he is the pioneer in my school where I teach, and also a pioneer in the Philippines, is really something that I have to live up to, and I need to live up to every day. And it's something that I want to do because I'm the only Filipino American faculty member on our staff. And so that gives me the incentive and motive to do more and to make sure that I'm always there for my students. I make sure to keep an open door policy and encourage any and all students, who really come and seek my advice. I think in the workplace, one of the best things to do is to seek mentors who are there to support you and to help give you guidance. And also, I have to pay homage to my wonderful colleagues, and in particular, Professor James Wright. We're working on research together, looking at building coalitions between Asians and Black Americans, and also Professor Radha Modi. And having colleagues like that is really what makes my work even more joyful. And we're there to support one another and to continuously encourage one another. And I don't know if I would be here speaking to you guys today if I didn't also have them in my circle. And those are some of the things that I would encourage with faculty and staff and students, to build that camaraderie.
Thank you.
Yeah, going off of that, I guess I would just say, especially with supporting, APA students and colleagues in pursuing leadership roles, I think just like taking the time to have conversations, especially between like students and administration or students and faculty, is really, really important. And just like recently, I've been able to kind of sit down and share thoughts or have conversations with different faculty members, and it's just really helped me feel like someone's listening and someone cares about like the different things that Asian American students are going through and wants to implement different ideas or solutions, and kind of keeping that relationship going, as Dr. Campos was saying, and building that conversation for the future, especially, I think is a really big thing. And also like listening to students who are coming to faculty. Like I know a group of students who are involved in ASU have been working on a PowerPoint project to kind of consolidate a lot of the different issues we're talking about today and share it with different faculty members as a resource for them to be able to just like educate faculty and like learn about these different issues and stuff like that. So really like accepting students and being receptive when they come to you with like these types of things, I think is really important.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll jump into. So, in a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of workplaces, corporate offices are predominantly white. So how did I navigate? I played the game. I was outspoken. I was vocal about what I wanted to do and who I wanted to work with. And I also recognize I'm not a stereotypical Asian either, as Teaser Aurora probably knows, but I'm very extroverted. I'm very opinionated. I'm very vocal about where I stand on a lot of things. And so every company I worked with, every job I entered into, one of my very first questions, as with orientation with any company, they talk to you. Some of the management and leadership talks to you. They ask you if you have any questions. And one of my very first questions always is, how do I get promoted? What is my next step? What's the path to advancement? And almost every time they're shocked that I am asking that, because it's pretty much day one, right? So what kind of audacity do I have? But B, it's more of the like knowing the path. If you don't know if you're going to have support, then it might not be a long-term role for you. So it's not only a path to self-discovery, but it's a path to knowing who you're working for. And so it's critically important as you navigate your own career. But building that coalition is important. And the more you can be in a position of influence, the more you can help others come up from behind you. And so as you start to advance and you're starting to think about, I'm now, managing this amount of staff, I'm not, then you start to think about how you're recruiting staff and building teams. And if you come at it from a diversity lens, an inclusion lens, an equity lens, like providing access to, those that aren't given a second look, that's where you start to make meaningful change in the workplace. Right now, I'm one of the most senior folks in my group, and I'm the only Asian person in my particular business group. And I make it a point to recruit junior staff to my team. I make it a point to connect some junior staff that are Asians and other minorities to opportunities that I have more insight into. So it's important for any one of us as you advance in your career to make sure that you're extending an arm behind you to pull folks up. That's how you really start to level the playing field. So that support piece is just so critically important because as I mentioned before, Asians as in particular are least likely to get promoted. And just as as I mentioned before, I love data. So as a data point, as a whole, Asian Americans make up roughly 12% of the workforce. Of the Fortune 1000, only 4% sit in board seats. So there's a huge disparity in the representation of executive leaders that are Asians and the workforce itself. So how do you close that gap? And how do you do that is you start to create access and opportunities for Asians and Asian Americans who don't know how to navigate, but you have. So help them get there, right? So it's incumbent upon all of us to build that community, build that coalition, and then we can start to close the gap.
Thank you, Zach. These are all really helpful and great answers. As we move on to the next set of questions, we're going to be taking sort of a sharp turn, but I think it's just equally as important as to what we've discussed so far today, which is that with most of us, I think we're aware of what's been going on the news. And so with the uprising of hate crimes against us, how are you all feeling about the events that have transpired? And what have you all been doing in your respective positions to encourage change?
Well, I guess I'd like to kind of jump in on this one. My feeling on this is I'm still horrified that this is happening. And I don't know if all of you have heard, but I think one of the latest incidents that was reported just yesterday happened, I think it was in New York City, and an individual with a hammer attacked two Asians on the street. And And so seeing that, it's really changed the way that I take care of my daily routine and my daily life. You know, that I do what I can to not go alone anywhere, just in case, because you just don't know when that could happen. But at the same time, I think that we have really good a good community here in Tallahassee, to where I still, you know, I definitely do feel safe, but you just never know. I have parents who are elderly, and and they're in their 80s. I call them, you know, even more frequently than I used to check in on them and to continue to warn them, you know, don't just go anywhere, you know, be careful, because the attacks are, it doesn't matter your age, your gender, nothing, you know, if people want to attack you, they will. And my other concern is that I have a brother who is an adult with autism, and so he's disabled, and who's to say that somebody will not attack him, you know, just because he happens to be out and just because he's Asian. Fortunately, with COVID, you know, they're not going out like they normally do, but it's still a concern of mine. And some of the ways, you know, just to address those concerns is just to continue my participation in the community. You know, one of the things that I'm trying to push for right now with the Filipino Association, and also with working with the Asian Coalition, is to maybe have a community event where we get to speak with maybe the mayor if he's available, or with TPD, Tallahassee Police Department, to just talk about the climate within the city, and to give more assurance and build more camaraderie and relationship in the local community. And another thing is just, you know, with research, I mentioned a piece of research I'm doing with Professor Wright in building coalitions. And one of the new events that I'm going to start working on, which is inspired by all of you and this panel, is to hold a 1-week workshop in the summer for students and young adults that would educate Filipinos or young Filipinos about Filipino American history and knowing where they come from, because until this day, many Filipino children or Filipino American children or even Asian American children don't understand or don't realize that we have a long history in this nation. And it's going to be up to us to be able to teach that to them and to know who they are and where they come from.
Thank you. That's inspiring.
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, for the last question, how we can provide a safe space, I think it's important to include students in that conversation of how we can provide that safe space for students or affected individuals. I think it's incredibly important that we acknowledge the harm and the hate crimes that are happening in our community, and in providing space for students to kind of work through those emotions. Students should be part of that conversation, and I think that that's really being intentional in that and saying, like, how can we support you, and how can we provide space for you is going to be really important in providing that safe space for them. So that's all I was going to say.
Oh, thank you, Ravi. I didn't want to present the last question to everyone else too, is that at least from what I've witnessed, there aren't a lot of safe spaces for our APA students. So how can the non-APA community provide that support for the students?
Yes, I could go ahead as a student. So I know, like, a lot of the stuff we've been trying to do. So last month, the Asian American Student Union, we hosted a vigil where we just gave people the chance to speak about how they were feeling, share messages of empowerment, even like practice, you know, with other members of the community, practice like their faith, if they wanted to kind of let out their emotions in that aspect, or even through like music, singing, lots of different avenues. And I think that was a really, really great like healing space. And it just like allowed people to feel heard or feel like they weren't alone. And I think that's important. I think another important thing is specifically within FSU is diversifying the like resources available to students, especially when it comes to like mental health resources and counseling resources, and making sure that we have like diverse staff available when possible, and making that information also like transparent and accessible to students, so that if they are looking to connect with a faculty or staff member of a specific background or like with a specific focus, that they're able to find that information and connect with those people, because oftentimes it can be really hard to find those connections and just find that information. So I think that's another really important thing that can help students just feel like they have a safe space or somewhere to go to or someone to go to during like when they're facing hardships or feeling, difficulties.
Thank you for sharing. Hopefully our advisors will definitely touch on those resources and diversify it. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts. We're gonna go on to the next question and our final one before our Q&A. We know that we are a little on our time, but thank you again for all our audience members for being patient with us. And thank you for, again, still sticking with us. So in closing, with our last question on moving forward. So how can the non-APA community be co-conspirators for the APA community? And by co-conspirators, we chose not to use allies, because co-conspirators, as defined by Bettina Love in the book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, co-conspirators are willing to use their intersections of privilege, leverage their power, and support marginalized, disenfranchised, and/or oppressed groups to stand in solidarity and confront an issue. So how can the non-APA community be the co-conspirators for the APA community? And then what are some ways that the FSU staff and faculty members can do to support and show love towards APA and students?
Well, I think that one of the ways to do this, and a good friend always said this to me even when I was in school. He and his name is Clyde Diao. You know him. Maybe some of you know him. And he would always say to me, you know what, Portia, if you really want to understand people, you've got to dance their dance. And this is a person who's an extrovert and who loves singing and a good celebration. And what he was always trying to say to me is that, I can go to my own events, with the Filipino Association, but I need to do more. That in order to bridge to other communities, we need to show support. And so, right now we know that, and just to give you an example, we know that India is facing some really hard and difficult times. And so my husband happens to be the president of the Filipino Association here in Tallahassee. And I had talked to him and I said, we have to reach out and see what can we do to help the Indian community, because if, for many of you who don't realize, the Indian community here in Tallahassee is actually the largest Asian community, and they're very vibrant. And we've been to some of their events, and some of my closest friends, especially when I was doing the PhD program at Rutgers, are of Indian descent. And so, personally, that's a concern to me, because the community is really hurting. And so one way is just bridging across those boundaries, and to, show that assistance, show that help. And it's not just ethnicity, I think that in general in the community, we can do those things. And although we're talking about, it's Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, and these are really important issues, but at the same time, we all have cultures we love to celebrate. And so, my suggestion too is when there's an event, not to be afraid to go out, that it's out there in the community. And in order to understand cultures, go to the events, taste the food, and learn just a little bit more. And I think that helps to further understanding.
And on that note, I'd like to piggyback on what Portia was saying, talk about cultural events. This is also to encourage all of you to participate in all the cultural events that are going on in Tallahassee or in the Big Bend area. There are so many things that we can learn from different people. And I also am very supportive of supporting a student as a mentor for the student. And I know the Center for Global Engagement has different programs that we can support the international students. And then encourage students to speak up, speak out, and support them when they're going through fighting the injustices that we see all the time. And also talk about cultural events. May I put a plug in for for something that's coming in for the Asian Coalition?
Go ahead.
Okay, we are doing a mini Asian festival on May 22nd, and we're featuring all the local groups that are in Tallahassee, all the people who live in the Tallahassee and the Big Bend area, and it's going to be at Tom Brown Park. And if you need some information, please give me a call. And I'll send Nikki the information. It'll be on Facebook and other social media stuff. And I just want, for all of us to work together, because we are the ones that make a community, and unless we learn how to work together and take care of each other, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I'll add into that as well. At first, I love the use of co-conspirators. I've been using accomplice. I think it achieves the same kind of undertones. But really, it's about being thoughtful and learning. It's not on us to educate non-Asians. I would say I would challenge everyone, non-APAs, to take some time to learn. There's a ton of resources out there now. The Asian Americans mini docu-series on PBS is a great place to start. And really, the little things. It's honestly just the little things. There's so often I've been to, and I'm sure many of you have been to events and meetings and so on, where the primary facilitator or speaker is like, "I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher your name," and then say their name and subsequently butcher it. But rather than saying, "Hey, I'm sorry," take the extra few seconds to ask them how to pronounce their name. That's a very simple but very meaningful gesture that goes a long way in inclusion and mutual respect. But how can that community be built is really across all generations, across all communities, because as was said earlier, we have to do it together. We cannot do this alone, and we need everyone to kind of put their respective support in, and really kind of galvanize the entire communities, all the communities, in a way where it's supportive and not destructive and detracting from one another, because it's so easy for us to get lost in the conversations and think that there might be more focus on one group more than the other, but it's really just timing of conversations, timing of what's happening in current events, and the anti-Asian hate that's been going on. I'm angry about it like everyone else, but it's not new. I'm not surprised by it. It goes back hundreds of years. So we're just in a new generation of it. So we all need to work together, Asian and non-Asian alike, to think about how we can raise all communities, not just Asians.
Thank you, Zach.
Well, thank you so much, Zach. We are now going to go into our Q&A section. We have 2 questions currently in the chat, and so I can just bring it up to all of you. And if there are any more, please feel free to drop them into the chat. But we do have one question from Lindsay, and she asks, what gaps do you see in recognition and inclusion of APA communities at FSU? So again, what gaps do you see in recognition and inclusion of APA communities at FSU?
I think a gap that I definitely see is like the lack of accessibility or just offering of courses on Asian American studies, and just information about that. I think like, and a big reason why I think that's important is because, kind of like Zach was saying, these issues aren't new, but they seem new because we fail to recognize like a lot of the past history of Asians and Asian Americans. And I think understanding those, a lot of that comes from understanding the history and then applying that to like the present day. And I know there are like some Asian American studies or literature courses offered, but it's so hard to find the information like for that, or how to access those courses or those resources, stuff like that. So I think that's a big issue. And another issue that I've heard a lot of different students talk about is also just like language barriers, and especially for international students, and like not having enough resources for just different languages and stuff like that. So that's another thing that I've definitely seen students talk about.
Thank you.
I think another gap would be, especially for international students or foreign-born students, not necessarily having a full, complete understanding or even trust of our democratic system and government. And I'm not saying that our democratic system is perfect, because it's not either. But I would say that compared to many other Asian nations, we have even more ability here to voice our concerns, to express our First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, and sometimes students are not sure how to navigate that, or how to educate themselves on that, and there's the fear of speaking out, because if you look at the history of Asian nations and countries, you see a lot of colonization, and you see also government trying to silence voices and penalizing people for those reasons. But here in the US, we have the ability to speak out. And I think educating international and foreign-born individuals would be something that's a lot more helpful, because again, if we don't speak out, then how is anyone going to know that we're suffering? How is anyone going to know that there's issues or problems? And you can even see that with the APIA hate organization, the nonprofit organization that tries to collect data, that they've collected information on 3,800 hate crimes in the US. But we also know at the same time that that's only a small portion, that there are many crimes that are occurring that are not even reported. And so, being able to educate our students in that regard, I think is going to be very important.
Thank you so much. So the next question that we have was in reference to what Dr. Campos brought up in an earlier question. But an audience member is curious if any of the panelists are raising children who do not share the same Asian phenotypical features, and how they help their children recognize their connection to their Asian and or other culture, while also respecting that they are not Asian. And so they specifically said that they are speaking as a mixed race person whose children are very clearly white and will never be perceived differently. So would anyone like to share their thoughts, or if you all have your own children in answering this question?
Well, I don't have any children personally, but I do have a lot of family members. Philippines is very diverse, and because at one, the Philippines also had the largest military base at one point outside the United States. Even with that, there's a lot of diversity, and so I have a ton of family members who are diverse with backgrounds, and not just Filipino, but Filipino American, Filipino Australian, European descent, German, Spain. And also when I look at my own family, my sister, for example, looks more ethnic Filipino than I do. And so I think education is a big part of it, but at the same time, taking advantage of those cultural opportunities when you can celebrate the Asian culture, and bringing your children to those type of events and getting them involved, I think is super important. And I will say, I know that Ms. Aurora is right now muted, but I would say one of the wonderful things about what she does in the community, especially in dance, is that if you look at her dancers, they are super diverse, and she teaches them about Filipino culture and Filipino dance. And I've always been amazed at how she brings them on stage and they're not Filipino, but yet they know much more about the history of dance and culture in the Philippines in that regard than I do. And so, you know, exposing children, and I would say all children, to various different cultures and diversity is really what's going to help them with that understanding and to give them much more of an identity, especially for children who happen to be Asian and adopted and who have parents who might be white American or even Black American. That's a way to just be part of the culture and to experience it.
Yeah, I don't have any kids either. So preface with that, I think I mentioned that earlier, but I just want to add, excuse me, I was one of those students that did those dancing classes, the Filipino dancing classes with when I was a student. And it just opened my eyes to a whole different culture that I had not previously known about. And I have to this day, a lot of those folks that I did that class with, I'm very good friends with. And so, I mean, again, I don't have any kids, but exposure helps is my bottom line. I just want to echo Dr. Campos in saying that the exposure does help. But I have given a lot of thought in terms of like how I want to raise my kids. So it's one of those things through experiential learning, I think is going to help a lot in all aspects. And personally, my family is also multi-ethnic and multiracial. My uncle is Black, and my aunt is also adopted on my mom's side, so she's Japanese and Swedish, and so my entire like family is really multiracial, multi-ethnic, and it was just interesting growing up that way because it just gave me a different perspective on society. So all that to say, again, in short, exposure helps.
Thank you, Zach. I think we're going to stop here today and just end it off with our takeaways. And so first and foremost, as I mentioned in the beginning, and as you've heard from our panelists today, APA identity is a spectrum. Everyone is in a different position in their lives. It's changing, it's fluid, it can be messy. And then secondly, we want to encourage our APA colleagues and students to pursue leadership roles. Stereotypes have a real impact. So to break the cycle or the bamboo ceiling, we want to create the awareness to narrow down that gap through efforts of continuous learning, training, and exposure to different cultures and networks.
Again, on that note, with identifying, learning, and sharing those resources and networks, really ensure that our APA colleagues and students feel visible on campus and beyond. And in thinking about outside of, celebrating, Asian Pacific American heritage by attending events and visiting museums, we can take actionable steps in learning and in really educating ourselves on APA issues. And so again, hopefully these panelists have gave you some insightful tips on how to do so. But just to also keep in mind that the APA umbrella continues to evolve, uniting all subgroups, but undermining the struggles of each subgroup. So with that being said, all of us come from very different parts of Asia. You can put us in a cluster, but you have to keep in mind that each ethnicity has its own set of cultural expectations, issues that are well worth investigating, because it is important if you want to know the API identity, you have to recognize that there are so many of us that fall under that umbrella. And so in truly supporting our colleagues and our staff and our students, you really want to make sure that you individually take the time to learn about the different cultures under this umbrella. And so lastly, thank you again for all our panelists for joining us. We just want to leave this as a last minute final thoughts, because each of them may have some events or again, some information they would like to pass on to each and one of you, our audience members. And so we will give them the floor again to just offer and share any kind of resources with all of you. So please, I can open up the chat again so that they can share it with all of you. So please do so. And thank you again for joining us. And so take it away, our panelists. Please feel free to share your resources.
Well, I'm here at FSU and I'm in public administration. And so I would be more than happy to even have lunch with any and all of you and chat about this topic a little bit more. And so if I can be of assistance, especially in the Tallahassee area and on campus, please feel free. You could share my email address with everyone, after the event or even in the chat.
I would like to invite all of you or anybody that's interested to be a member of the Asian Coalition of Tallahassee. This is the umbrella association for the many Asian groups in the area. And I think also that if we have most of you come and help support, there will be a better understanding, not just in the FSU community, but all the other TCC, FAMU, and the greater Tallahassee area. And also, I would like to thank you for inviting us, for inviting me. Let's do this more often. Let's not just wait during the API Heritage Month. This should be an ongoing thing where we're all kind of getting together and trying to figure out how we can help each other and just give each other a pat on the back, like you did a good job, you did a good job with this. It's not always like, oh, you did a good job, but that thing drives me crazy when somebody says you did a good job, but that's not nice. But we need to have more conversations like this. It can't be just during the month of May. We have to do it all year round and as often as we can. And like I said, thank you so much. I'm the great grandma, the grandma of this whole group, of this whole panel. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You don't know how you make my heart feel. I'm just so elated and happy to know all of you.
Yeah, I just also want to reiterate how grateful I am to be here and have an opportunity to learn from y'all and with y'all and all that fun stuff. I am, a grad student, so I don't really do a lot of programming, but I'm excited to be part of the FSU community virtually for now and in person soon. And, just grateful to be here. So thank you so much.
You can go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, same thing. I really appreciate the time that you all are spending with us. I mentioned a nonprofit that I volunteer with, and it's called Ascend Leadership. And a lot of the data that I was sharing with you all is from the research and the white papers that is done through the foundation, through Ascend Leadership. And you can find all those white papers, they're public at ascendleadershipfoundation.org. And again, I mean, data is easy. We have Google now. We have all sorts of resources. So, I would, challenge all of you to spend some time, even if it's a couple hours a week, to really learn about, where this all is derivative of, because COVID only exacerbated a lot of the challenges, but it's not it's not where these challenges started. It goes back, like I said, hundreds of years. So, but I do want to thank you all for, hearing us talk, first of all, but I definitely am open to any further conversation. I'm very much involved with the FSU community still while I'm in DC. I'm in Tallahassee. I was in Tallahassee a lot for board meetings and such, but pretty soon I'll probably be back for future board meetings once we return. But definitely open to any conversations. And if you are in the business world or want to know more from the business context of all this, the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives that I'm involved with or at large, I'm certainly open to the conversation. So please don't hesitate.
Yes, and I'll also leave you with my contact info. You can reach me at fsuaasu.director@gmail.com. And follow us on Instagram at FSUAASU or give our Facebook page a like as well. We'll be posting all sorts of events for continued learning throughout the entire year. We have everything from educational events to social events to cultural events. So if you're interested in learning more, our events are always open to anyone and everyone. Everyone's welcome to come. They're all free. So come out, join us. We would love to have you. Yeah, you can always reach out to me. My email's in the chat. So.
Great. I think that's everyone. Again, thank you all so much for coming to this event with open minds and ears. Before you all go, I am going to drop a handout that I thought I downloaded. I did, okay. Into the Zoom chat, which has just a few more information, a little bit of the history, some ways you can support the APA community, maybe some movies and shows, etc. So definitely take that handout if you can. We'll definitely share the slides, the handout through CIA and through AF Teams and wherever else. And you can always reach out to Nikki and I through our FSU emails. Mine is jwiley@fsu.edu.
And mine's, so my husband will be upset, but I got married, COVID hit, so I'm just using my maiden name. It will change eventually, but nhobson@fsu.edu. You'll still get in contact with me. But yeah, everyone shall know, yeah, my last name is right, but yes. But again, thank you again to our audience for attending. We really appreciate all your participation. You are all free to go. Definitely would like to keep our panelists here in case there's anything we just wanted to share amongst us, and if we wanted to share out some information to you again through CIA. But we all hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you again for joining us.